Nigeria's decision to extend the implementation of the fuel subsidy removal policy has ripple effects that are already being felt. One of the consequences is that the cost of insuring Nigeria's dollar bonds as Nigeria's credit default swaps rose to their highest since October 2020. Bloomberg says Nigeria's 5-year credit default swaps have risen 100 basis points. The delay in removing the fuel subsidy would see the already crash-strapped country spend close to 3 trillion naira on subsidy as the NNPC takes on the cost of the subsidy through under-recovery and other means. Former President Goodluck Jonathan in 2012 faced a similar challenge when he removed petrol subsidy, forcing the price from 65 naira per litre to 140 naira. And the incident sparked protests in several parts of the country, especially in Lagos, where thousands converged on Ojota for over a week, halting economic activities in the country's commercial capital. Petrol price has been projected to increase to about 350 naira if the international price of oil continues to rise and the removal goes forward. This would have, and will have, whenever it happens, a knockdown effect that will be felt all through the Nigerian economy. Our focus today is the cost of Nigeria's fuel subsidy. This is Business Edge. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. My guest today is Gospel Obele. He's the chief economist for Streetnomics. Gospel, welcome back to Business Edge. Good morning.
Thank you for having me, Tolu. Good morning.
All right, so let's start with how the subsidy conversation in Nigeria really has started. And it's been a long-standing one, with subsidies being introduced around 1970s as a response to the oil price shock in 1973. So the recent refrain we've been hearing is that the subsidy is not benefiting those that it was meant to benefit. So let's start from there. Does subsidy actually benefit the poorest Nigerians, given the fact that whether they're buying the fuel or it's buying food that's been transported with the fuel, there's a cost that's associated that somehow comes back to fuel across the country? Let's start from there.
That conversation is very valid. Worries around if it really benefits the average Nigerian. I mean, the idea of subsidies, the concept of subsidies is economic or social relief, right, from the average citizen in the sense. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a tool that can be deployed correctly or wrongly, or can find itself in the hands of the wrong people, as it were. In more developed markets, you have the unemployment benefit and other social relief programs that exist. Subsidy is just one of them. But unfortunately, the conversation of subsidy hinged very strongly on the average or basic necessities of the average Nigerian. So in Nigeria, you have a fuel subsidy. In Egypt, you have bread subsidy and other interesting dynamics. These are things people need to get by on a day-to-day basis. That's why it's a burning conversation when things change, subsidy-wise, people go ahead and protest. Yeah, so has it been very, very impactful in terms of helping Nigerians? I don't think so, because of many reasons. Number one, the structure, the complexity of the Nigerian social economy is such that if anything affects anything, the price is transferred to the average Nigerian. All right. So subsidy or no subsidy, you still feel a price effect or a price impact on the cost of living of the average Nigerian. And secondly, you also have a conversation where there are a lot of stakeholders who are interested, who have vested interest in the subsidy process, and as a result, do not really translate the impact of that subsidy on fuel prices and the like. So there are mixed reactions around how the economics of the fuel subsidy in Nigeria works, but significantly it has not impacted on the average Nigeria because we've seen improved cost centers and a high level of cost inflation on the economy as a result of that. But doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad idea.
Okay, so I like the fact that you mentioned there are subsidies still happening around the world. There are subsidies in the U.S., there are subsidies in other parts of the continent. And you also mentioned stakeholders. That's an interesting term that you use for some of the people involved, and we'll get to that later on. But one other thing I want to start with as well is as you said, there's a reason subsidies came about, to ease a burden on everyday essentials that citizens of a country might bear. But is there a possibility of looking at a point in time where Nigeria's fuel subsidy became more of a problem than it was a solution to an issue that the country had experienced?
It's significantly, it's been perceived as a problem on two fronts. I remember a former bank governor saying that about $20 billion were lost in the coffers of the regulatory institution. That's on the oil and gas space now, in the oil sector rather, a regulatory institution, and we could not account for those monies. All right, there were conversations of these subsidy monies being lost or being misplaced or being misappropriated as well. All right, when you think of that and the previous attempt to remove subsidies and what those monies have been used for in terms of the Shopee program and all that, you can see that either for removal or for continuation, it has not really benefited for the average Nigerian. How many Nigerians significantly benefited, or how many jobs or how many businesses grew sustainably over time? All right. Do not forget also that these elements are a function of other variables working effectively in the economy as well. All right. You can't use subsidy is not the solution. There has to be a more sustainable solution in terms of fixing the refineries and ensuring that we cut down on that importation spree, all right, of petrol and fuel products or PMS products as it were. So subsidy is not the solution. It's just a social relief tool. All right, and the solution should be thinking around the sustainability line. So, what my argument here is there have been conversations on misappropriation of subsidy funds, saving the differentials between the pegged oil price and the real oil price in terms of budgeting and all of that, and ensuring that these monies are appropriated rightly. All right, and so it's just a mix, like I mentioned earlier on, of many reactions that leaves the average Nigerian confused and worse off for that situation in the sense. And that's a lot of people are really agitating for the removal of fuel subsidy, because at the end of the day, you can't really see the impact, as it were.
So let's talk about those stakeholders now. So Nigeria has come under fire from the IMF and the World Bank as well for the heavy financial burden that the country carries in providing the subsidy for fuel. The criticism is rooted in the belief that the money could be spent somewhere else on healthcare and education. So if the money would be better spent elsewhere, and if it's not helping those that it's meant to help, then who is benefiting? Who are the beneficiaries of keeping the subsidy regime in place?
Yes, I mean, one of the headline arguments in this part of the world has been that there's a revenue crisis and we cannot keep funding subsidies, all right? It's a conversation from the Ministry of Finance, from the NNPC and all that. I mean, they're crying out that they're literally down to zero on their accounts because a lot of monies and huge debts have been going into false subsidies and all that. As a result, the removal of these items, but then again, we've seen that the argument has not really been valid, when you look at it from both cost points. But in terms of stakeholders, I mean, there are a lot of institutional stakeholders along the value chain that facilitate for the success of these items, all right? That's moving subsidies from the point where petrol is being imported to the Nigerian economy and then you're selling off. There's also a conversation around the cost of getting FX, all right, to import fuel, all right? When you think of the cost of getting subsidies to import fuel, we also think of the fact that there are some hindrances or transfer costs as a result of the failing value of the naira. So there are many economic variables, all right, that has reinformed stakeholder approach to how subsidy is being deployed, and in some cases probably hijacked, as such that you can't really see the effect on the lives of the average citizen in Nigeria.
So we're at a point in time where it seemed that the Buhari administration was going to do what many others have talked about doing, and one administration has attempted, and that was to remove the subsidy. But we've heard from the National Economic Council of Nigeria that they are backtracking and that there are provisions in the budget for the subsidy to remain in place until June. And we're looking at about 3 trillion naira that the country will spend between now and June in order to subsidize fuel, or PMS as it's known in the country. Is this something that Nigeria can afford, especially in 2022 with high debt burden that the country is carrying, rising costs, of course, with crude oil? And we're going to have to talk about the associated costs between crude oil rising and then, of course, the cost for subsidy rising. But do you think Nigeria really can afford another few months or even 18 months, as we've heard, of subsidizing fuel?
Yeah, the argument to subsidize fuel is also, it's strongly in line with the argument of a revenue crisis in Nigeria. All right, people think economists and many analysts think that it needs to be removed because of the impact on government spending. All right, and I think that it's been unfair. We've been attacking this subsidy conversation so much that we forget the real elements that created the subsidy in the first place, all right? Poor refineries are not working, you have bad governance, poor public leadership, a high government expenditure as well, not just subsidy. Government is also spending on many things, servicing waste and leakages as well, all right? So there are many gaps that could have been closed to deal. However, like I mentioned earlier on, subsidy is a valid and social relief tool, in the sense. But then again, like I mentioned, the way economies like Nigeria works to a large extent, because there are many complexities around that, you need many things as well as a subsidy to make the subsidy a success in the first place. All right, subsidy on its own cannot deliver. So there's nothing wrong with the subsidy. It's just that you have a lot of institutional and variable elements on the value chain that frustrate the subsidy effort such that it doesn't get to the average Nigerian. So it doesn't make sense keeping it on the revenue drive or spending program of the government in the current year. But then again, there's also a political spin around retaining the subsidies this year. I mean, 2022 is a year of correctness in a sense. So anything that it will take the average government to stay economically correct so as to be on the good books ahead of 2023 would be done in terms of policy instruments, in terms of tool as it were. And that's what I think is playing here. Nigeria does not really have what it takes to keep serving subsidy, but they chose to keep it for other reasons regarding political and economic correctness as we move into an election year. And not forgetting also that we are not dealing with a strong institutional fundamentals that really make subsidies count for the average Nigerian.
All right, Gospel, let's take a break. There's some numbers involved in this conversation I want us to look at. And then, of course, as I said earlier, we're looking at rising crude oil prices now. What does that mean as well for the subsidy regime in Nigeria and the kind of additional financial burden it could put on the country? You're watching Business Edge, and those numbers involved in this conversation are enormous. Hold on to these as we go on a break. $24.5 billion and $7 billion. I'll explain what they mean when we come back. Still with me is Gospel Obele, the chief economist for Streetnomics, and we're looking at the cost of Nigeria's fuel subsidy. Now, between 2006 and 2018, Nigeria reportedly spent about 10 trillion naira, or about $24.5 billion, at the current official exchange rate of 411 naira to $1 on petroleum subsidies. In 2019 and 2020, about 3 trillion naira, that's $7 billion, was spent on subsidies. And the number is expected to go up for 2021 and 2022. It means that Nigeria has spent over $30 billion on fuel subsidies over the past 16 years or so. In 2018, the country spent $722 billion, or about $2.4 billion at that year's official rate of $1 to 306 naira, but spent only $1.5 billion on health. And the question continues to be asked, is Nigeria's fuel subsidy bad economics? Now, Gospel, we're seeing crude oil prices rise now on the international market. Global benchmark crude, Brent crude is currently $89.97. It's barely just there, under $90, with expectations that it'll go beyond and maybe hitting $100 sometime this year. What does that mean for Nigeria's subsidy regime if crude oil prices continue to rise?
I mean, the Nigerian subsidy regime has just been a very, very clear play of poor economics in a sense. You spend so much amounts of money funding subsidies and health and all that. Of course, rising fuel prices in the international market would mean higher subsidy payments or subsidy receipts, because the government will need to spend more to subsidize, as it were, and all that. But then again, it's an advantage, because by the time we sell crude, all right, the government revenue also increases. But when you see an increase in government revenue coexist with an increase in subsidy receipts, that's also a cause for worry. And I can understand that's the argument for the removal. But the current administration knows that if you remove subsidy, there's going to be a lot of economic bounce back in terms of the economy will literally be hijacked, because people will get on the streets, people will be frustrated, inflation will rise most likely, cost push on the end and all of that, and that may affect the image or the argument for retaining power in 2023. However, the conversation of poor economics is from the perspective that we've not properly handled the subsidy process, as it were. All right. I mean, like you rolled out the data from 2006 up until now, 2016, thereabout. That is more than enough time for us to have fixed the refineries. But then again, it's to tell you where the political energy, the political language, the cluster of energy has been focused, all right? The cluster of interest has been focused. Because you have that cluster of energy and interest there, all right, activities in that sector has spiraled, to really, really unnecessarily significant hikes, all right, in terms of funding, payments, attention, transactions, and as such, you left the basics that could have helped you solve the problem sustainably or unattended to and all of that. So I'm not really surprised. The same thing also, you see that the oil sector contributes about 7.5% to the economy, but the non-oil sector contributes about 93% thereabout to the economy. But then our major revenue drive is from just 7% of the economy. All right, that's really, really poor economics. That is strongly misaligned with economic principles and how the basic economics should work. And so I think it's also a play of political language, the president is also the minister of petroleum in a sense. All right, that's to tell you where the interest lies and where stakeholders interests are really, really clustered on. And of course, you begin to see every other thing spiral from that angle. So it's a test of clear poor leadership and bad values and all of that. And we'll see that play out over time as oil prices increase. It's going to affect our revenue position and, of course, fiscal spending and the like. So it's expected. But it's a function of the poor public leadership than the subsidy itself.
Interesting. So we've seen the consequences sort of already start to roll in regards to this. Now, the cost of insuring Nigeria's dollar bonds against default jumped to the highest since October 2020, going up about 450 basis points to 550 in the credit risk analysis for 5-year debt swaps. That sounds like a lot of jargon to many Nigerians. What does that actually equal? Because this right now is what many people are saying is a direct consequence of the conversation and the decision right now to hold on to the subsidy. So what does this debt default, the swaps, what does it have to do with Nigerians and the economy? What's the consequence of that?
So yeah, it's a lot of things that, the government decisions and government actions and inactions are seen largely from how the economic institutions, investment climate, and all of these things work. Do not forget that at the bane of all of these actions is more or less the need to be politically correct ahead of an election. I don't want to go into too much of the jargon right now, but the truth of the matter is that the political language, all right, and the efforts around managing excesses such as subsidy has played out in how the bonds market, investment markets, FDIs, and all of those institutional investors on how they perceive the country and how they're willing to commit, all right, their bond initiatives or programs towards, in the sense of on the political end, the Nigerian economy and all that. So we see that play out there. I think it's largely a function of the language, the leadership, the perception, all right, and how we see the actions play out accordingly, all right, than a function of just Nigeria is not a favorable investment destination or anything like that. It's more or less on the softer elements and the harder elements, because we see that already in the actions being played out. That's my take here, really, because if it was on the reverse, we would have seen much more positivities in these regards, and of course, enabling the economic kickback in terms of recovery and investment it needs to drive towards inclusion.
All right, so as we wrap up, whether many like it or not, whether it's now or it's 6 months from now or it's 18 months from now, Nigeria's subsidy is literally on the way out. And towards the end of 2020, there was a proposal to replace the program with an initiative to give 5,000 naira directly to the poorest Nigerian families in order to sort of balance that out. We've also heard from the Minister of Finance, Zainab Ahmed, who said it's become clear that the timing is problematic, that practically there is still heightened inflation, and also the removal of subsidies would further worsen the situation and thereby impose more difficulties on the citizens. Whenever it happens, what should the governments be looking at doing in order to sort of balance out or provide some kind of soft landing, some kind of economic ease for citizens while the subsidy is removed? And do you think it should be a one-time yank that Band-Aid off, or a phased removal that Nigeria plans over the next few years?
I mean, one of the things I've really noticed in the governance and leadership in Nigerian context, not just the function of the current administration, is number one, we really, really roll out economics very poorly and sometimes quite annoying and very, I just dumb, you just some form of dumb policies around. And first and foremost, the 5,000 naira policy would not do anything, and it's just patching the problem. It's not fixing the problem. All right, that's the same mechanism that was used during the Empower and the social safety net time and all of that. The same strategy also was used by the past administration by rolling out Shopee, as a means to, all of these things are just a cycle of poor economics, and it's really hurting the economy more than it's fixing the economy. The only way that the subsidy would not impact Nigerians so much is if, number one, power is fixed. All right, because one of the reasons why the average Nigerian will quickly feel the subsidy hit, or the average business will quickly feel the subsidy hit, is because they rely a lot on PMS and diesel to run their daily lives. It's not done anywhere in the world. All right, if you fix power, all right, the average Nigerian will have more time for productivity, will spend less time in the filling station, and the quality of the naira, the value of the naira would also improve because businesses can do more with little or with less. But right now, we are spending more and we are doing less. That is an equation. That is outright failure in the sense by design and all that. And then on top of that, you're trying to put 5,000 naira as a mean. Come on, that's really, it doesn't make any sense, as it were. So the only way forward is to, number one, fix power so that you relieve people from the need to always depend on PMS. Secondly, fix the refinery so that you cut Nigeria off that import spending spree of having to, sell raw materials and import finished goods. But then again, the fixing of refineries may not happen anytime soon because you have a lot of vested interest. The idea of extractive institutions is to ensure that stagnancy stays for a long time so that people or institutions or stakeholders can feast on that stagnancy, all right, and then the economy continues on a sort of poverty traps or virtual circle of poverty, as it were. All right, so that 5,000 naira will only push Nigerians to more poverty, all right, because inflation is not dropping as well. And you've not also dealt with the power situation, which makes a lot of Nigerians resort to the filling stations for fuel, PMS, and all that. So until the structural element around fixing refineries and creating power is done, all right, Nigerians may not, no matter what policy is being rolled out, Nigerians will not be better off for it. Rather, maybe likely worse off for all of these actions that the government is taking at the moment. So I think we need to go more sustainable, but I don't think we are ready. Everybody's waiting for the Dangote refinery, and we're not ready to fix our own other refineries. And fixing Dangote refineries does not really solve the problem because that's just one man in the pool. We need that, and that's the idea of the PIA, the Petroleum Industrial Act. All right, to decentralize the sector, encourage more players to come in, fix the refinery so that we can have a competitive-based pricing and all that. That's the only way it can make sense. Dangote cannot fix the problem. And I keep hearing the central bank governor and other economic stakeholders speak more around one-man refinery and to solve a problem. It doesn't make any sense to me.
All right, Gospel, thank you so much. There's going to continue to be conversation about this. And we'll definitely be touching base as there are more developments. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Same here. Have a great day ahead.
Same to you. And the conversation, you can see, will not stop, even with a supplementary budget that will allow Nigeria to finance the subsidy regime until June, and conversations about extending it for 18 months. There's a lot more behind that, and we'll keep our eyes on it. Something else we're keeping our eyes on are stories on NC 4 to watch. Coming up next. And we start where else? With oil prices, which rose on Friday for their 6th weekly gain amid concerns of tight supplies as major producers continue their policy of limited output increases amid rising fuel demand. Brent crude futures climbed to $89.79 a barrel after falling 62 cents during the previous day. However, prices did reach $91.04 earlier in the session, the highest since October 2014. Tolulope Oil has projected that it will spend $5 million, about 565 million Kenyan shillings in capital expenditure for oil development in Kenya this year. In its January trading statement and operational guide, The multinational company estimates capital expenditure for 2022 will total $350 million, or about 39.6 billion Kenyan shillings. Sendi, Kenya's logistics startup, space gained multi-million-dollar funding totaling about $26.5 million from 7 funding rounds to penetrate the African market. The Nairobi-based company, which facilitates door-to-door deliveries between individuals and businesses, will use the funds to commence business in the new markets, including Nigeria, Egypt, Ghana, and South Africa. And finally, Reserve Bank Governor has explained that the MPC has decided to increase the repurchase rate by 25 basis percentage points for 4% per year with effect from January 28th. 4 members of the South African Reserve Bank MPC preferred an increase and 1 member preferred an unchanged rate. And that's a conversation we had yesterday. You can find it on our app and also on our YouTube channel as well. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Have a pleasant weekend, and I'll see you on Monday, 11 a.m. West African time.